Welcome to the Reconstructing Inclusion podcast. My name is Amri Johnson, your host. Season 3 of the Reconstructing Inclusion podcast will be focused on opening up dialogue about a way forward in the diversity and inclusion space that's focused more on who we are than what we ascribe to one another. It will be about shifting patterns and practices we've come to adhere to in the space, examining them with fresh eyes in the current climate, about principles the work has revolved around, and why and what principles we might need to consider anew. About exploring our thinking, how we are making meaning of our workplaces and the world around us in the most curious ways we can. How we listen with skill, openly learn, create the conditions that allow colleagues to know they matter. Hello, folks. Amri here. Welcome to the Reconstructing Inclusion podcast. This is a special edition because I met somebody that I just had to get on the show, and that is Dr. Jen Sarrett. If I pronounce that, is it Sarrett or Sarrett?
It's Sarrett.
Sarrett. I knew that, and now I'm getting it confirmed. Welcome to the Reconstructing Inclusion podcast, Jen.
Oh, thank you, Amri, for having me. I've been excited for this for a few days and weeks now.
I'm looking forward to the conversation. I'll just do a quick overview. I met Jen. Jen attended one of our Elevating Your Inclusion Edge sessions, and then she bought my book, and then she reached out to me. And so I was so flattered and was so surprised that we never bumped into each other after being both Amri people and also public health people. So we had this kind of really great overlap. And then on top of it, we both worked in inclusion and diversity. So it was like this really perfect storm. And so I'm excited to jump in to talk all things related to diversity and inclusion, as well as really that experience you've had, because we have a similar lens. I call myself an old public health guy. My roots are there. So I'm looking forward to jumping into that. But before we go there, I always ask everybody that comes on the show a couple questions.
Okay.
So first question is, favorite song or movie you go to over and over again?
I really love David Byrne's song, Like Humans Do. It's a satirical look at sort of climate change and basically the perspective of, hey, there used to be stores here and now all I see are plants. What's happening? So it's really great.
They didn't pave paradise. They actually took the parking lot down and made paradise. So I like
exactly. Yeah, he was an opposite of Joni Mitchell there. Yeah.
And I'm a big Joni fan, so I like to see the reverse of it. Fantastic. And then the second question of the first two is a book or a person who has inspired you personally or professionally in your life or your career journey.
Top of the list there is my maternal grandmother, Yvonne Meade, who brought herself from a poor country girl in Walnut Hill, Illinois, to New York to become a dancer and a showgirl. Along the way, she worked for some very horrible people and had some really interesting experiences. She taught, what's his name? Not Frank Sinatra, but anyways, one of them, how to dance. She knew Frank Sinatra. He dated one of her roommates and would drink all her champagne. And then she met and married my grandfather, who was a jockey who won the Kentucky Derby in 1933. So they actually were friends with Hoover. But my grandfather actually ended up gambling all of his money away, even though he was a top earning jockey. So my mom grew up very poor, and my grandmother the whole time continued to have this like confidence and compassion and ability to find beauty even in hardship and to take risks. So just her story, I've been trying to write a book about her, but it's been on pause for a few months. I need to get back to it because I think that the story is just like one of those hidden amazing women behind a mediocre man.
Yeah, but it's interesting because you call him mediocre, but he did something that very few people will ever do, that many people aspire to and never achieve. And
Sure.
that means he put something extraordinary. He just got addicted to something. Addiction
Yeah.
is hell. It's hell.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially when you aren't even like fully aware that you're addicted. You just think that's just like gamble. But no, that's addiction. No, that's a fascinating story. When you write the book, I will be there to purchase it and hear about a fierce woman that kept being fierce even through the hardest of hardships.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. So, Jen, tell us who you are. Tell us about yourself, what you are seeking to create in the world. Anything that you think would be helpful for us to really get to know Jen in this short period of time we have. And of course, we'll put all links and things like that in the notes as well.
Awesome. Yeah. So a lot of what I do is heavily influenced in my experience as a teacher and advocate in the disability community, particularly autism and neurodiversity. That thinking back along my path, my very first student with autism, her name was Rebecca. She was only a year younger than me when I was in college. And within 6 months, I became her head teacher. And so was hiring other teachers. And I got to decide what I wanted to focus on teaching. And so I wanted to do social skills. And that was such an eye-opening experience to me because it's so nuanced and it's nearly impossible to really define social skills, but it also highlights all the kind of ridiculous things that social norms tell us we have to be doing. And so I kept that perspective throughout. And then while I was getting my PhD at Emory, focusing on studying autism and culture, I learned about universal design, which is an architectural concept or framework to build places and spaces that are as accessible as possible to as many people as possible, but not making anything more difficult. So the best example of this is the curb cut, those dips in between the curb and the roads, which were originally designed for people who use wheelchairs, but they're helpful for people with strollers and bikes and hand carts and the elderly and people distracted on their phones and toddlers and everybody. But what's most important is that it doesn't make it harder for anyone to navigate the street. And when I transitioned from academia to DEI, I was just shocked that this wasn't something that people in the field was aware of, because it seemed to me such a good merge or mix of the two fields of my backgrounds. And so that's how I approach everything in life, is like, how can we predict where there might be barriers to somebody or a type of person, and go ahead and design to increase accessibility that'll funnel down or trickle down to increase accessibility for everybody without making it more difficult for anybody. So I've done this with my academic work in terms of teaching. I would design and do a lot of workshops on designing classroom environments that were universally designed. And I got a lot of feedback of, this is really good for our English language students too. And this is really good for our first gen students too. And so I kind of proof of concept during that time brought that into how I'm currently doing consulting with organizations. I developed a methodology I call organizational culture design. And it really is inspired heavily by universal design being proactive and embedded and supportive for everybody.
I want you to come back to that. Starting in education, I recently did a couple talks in Almaty, Kazakhstan, and it was called the World Inclusion Congress, and it was just for educators. Probably at the forefront of it was the British school system really was the predominant voice in the Congress, and it pretty much across the world, those principles from British education are adopted by a lot of these schools that I encountered, at least. Even the school in Kazakhstan was very influenced by British education that we visited. When you think about universal design or you think about inclusion, and I'll say specifically for people who are neurodivergent, what lessons could be brought in? Like, obviously neurodivergence has become more of a thing in the kind of historical DEI space over the past probably 5 to 7 years, where I feel it like amplified, and even more recently, given what's happening in kind of what I call orthodox DEI, the neurodivergent conversation has increased, and companies are still doing that work while they might have gotten rid of the stuff that, quite frankly, and you know me, wasn't working, right? How could we think differently about the principles that are being applied and that you've been applying for a long time with this lens on neurodivergence? How does that translate into organizational life? And it might, I know it does, intersect with your approach, because I don't think people have made that distinction. I think they have, here's what DEI is based on the orthodoxy and since the death of George Floyd, while the world is beyond what I can put on the screen.
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I think about education in particular, and then I'll talk about organizations, when I am designing or doing workshops on designing classrooms to be more accessible and inclusive, one of the things I tell instructors is to think about what your teaching philosophy is and consider all that extra stuff as moldable or adaptable. So when I was teaching, I would, for example, give a paper assignment. I taught bioethics, for example. And I would say, take this bioethics case and apply it to this bioethics principle or whatever in 2 to 3 pages. But I would also say, if that is not accessible to you and you would like to do an alternative format, please let me know. You could come into my office and report orally to me. You could report in front of the class. You could do a video, an audio recording, like illustration, anything. Because to me, what my teaching philosophy was in general, and for this example assignment, was for the student to demonstrate that they understand how to apply bioethical principles to complex cases. The way they demonstrated that to me didn't really matter. And so I take that approach to a lot of my work, and I talk all the time about, we got to question the status quo. And with DEI, I think that questioning the status quo and being proactive are traits that the field has been failing on. And they are traits that are really important for actual sustainable change. As you mentioned with George Floyd, DEI has always been reactive, right? In the early days, reacting to the emergence in the United States of the Equal Employment Opportunity Act, reacting to things like George Floyd, reacting to internal complaints. And what that does, that creates band-aid solutions. Whereas if you're thinking proactively, integrating more flexibility, more trust and transparency into your organizational culture in terms of policies, procedures, practices, then you won't have to do this reactive stuff, and it'll be more sustainable and integrated. And so you can really focus on the more important work.
Yeah, that's so critical, Jen. And I think it's why we've gotten on. I think we started talking in May of 2025. And what I consider the space of sometimes being uncurious and being reflexive about where we've missed the mark and where we can get better as practitioners. Why are we getting the kind of resistance that we're getting? And why aren't we fully engaging with it rather than immediately like dismissing it? And so you summed it up there. And I think when you work on universal principles, you end up with, even when people question it, you can, with evidence, say, this is why I'm doing that. And I've been really learning about systems thinking through Dr. Laura and Derek Cabrera. And Derek is neurodivergent. And he says he can't stop moving. And when he was young, he had this big project and he did it and he just killed it. And the teacher said, your presentation and the way you did it and the time you put in it was great, but that was not the assignment. Even though he had mastered the content, he had an understanding of it that was deeper than most in the class, but they just didn't, the teacher said that wasn't the way we're supposed to do it. And I think that's the status quo.
Yep. Why are we doing it that way?
Exactly. And what are you eventually trying to create and for what purpose? I really appreciate that approach significantly. And I think we could do a lot better in that regard in the inclusion and diversity space. Jen, we're both public health folks, and you somewhat touched on how you brought public health into inclusion and diversity. How is that impacting your work now? What are you seeing right now that maybe we need to re-emphasize prevention, re-emphasize looking at the determinants that create outcomes and how we can do our best to mitigate then or move the barriers away versus this whole reactive approach that you just talked about?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I graduated with my PhD, I joined Amri's faculty of the Center for the Study of Human Health, where I led the design of the health equity curriculum and programming. So been thinking about this for a very long time. And we know that health is connected to everything and is deeply impacted by social inequities, which are related to various identity factors like race, gender, ability, and all of these different things. And that we can't really decrease health disparities unless we also impact our education system, our criminal justice system, our housing, obviously our health insurance, all of these other influencing systems that create the opportunities for some people to engage in preventative health and healthy behaviors and create barriers for other people for doing the same. So I live in Atlanta, Georgia, and in the Southeast in Georgia as well, we have a lot of problems with our health disparities. We have the highest percentage of adults reporting poor health status. We have the highest maternal morbidity. We have the highest rates of people not seeing a doctor because they can't have access, highest in infant mortality, lowest vaccination. And all of these are compounded by race and disability and gender. But in the United States, they're the highest of the high. I'm on the board of an organization called the Southern Alliance for Public Health Leadership, which formed just this year, and only months before we heard about these alliances happening out west and in the Northeast of states and governors that were going to create an alliance to advance public health efforts. And so this is not as formalized in terms of the government as that at all. But the director and I published an op-ed recently saying, why can't the health be a leader? Why can't the South be a leader in public health and health outcomes? Not only do we have the CDC and we have all these really great health resources in Atlanta, we have Emory, we have CHOA, we have all of these things, but we've done it before. So we eradicated malaria in the Southeast first by effective mosquito control. In South Carolina was the sort of site of the creation of our modern WIC program. And in the 90s, the Southeast had the highest vaccination rates. So we can build on previous successes and position ourselves to be leaders by attending to the fact that we have these really bad health disparities right now and trying to even overcorrect for them, I would say.
One thing I say a lot that I don't think has resonated so much with the Orthodox DEI community is that disparities don't equal discrimination. And so if we go in and we see disparities of outcomes, it's not just discrimination on those protected characteristics, full stop.
Yeah.
Kind of putting together what you labeled, but you didn't call social determinants. How does looking at social determinants keep us from the disparities equal discrimination conversation versus disparities equal disparities? There are causes of those disparities. And if we impact systems, we can address them. And it's two-way that individuals need to act, and we need to enable systems to make it a lot more frictionless. So to me, that's one of those conversations that I don't think we've had in the DEI space. What do you think could enable it? Because social determinants make sense to me. Think just on the fact that somebody has something because they're a certain skin color, even though they might be extremely wealthy. And I know there's some outliers around that. And people that are well off usually have better health outcomes. It doesn't matter what color they are. So to tell me a little bit about what could we think about or talk about differently? I'm not dismissing people that have that narrative. I'm just saying, can we go a little bit beyond it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, of course, there are sites and causal links with discrimination that lead to disparities, but like you said, not all of them. And so I always encourage people to think back to the foundation, to the core. Who created the systems that we're living in now? When we think about all the way back to the founding fathers, right? These were all white, able-bodied men who were land owning, who had often women who supported them in terms of taking care of their children and feeding and all of this other stuff. And they designed a system from their perspective because that's the perspective they had in the room.
But Jen, is that still, do you think that applies like universally today?
I think we have legacies of that. We have assumptions based on what it means to be an American that were created with these founding fathers. So, for example, the idea of American independence, we can pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. And this is a notion that totally ignores the fact that every single person is interdependent. No matter who you are, we may vary in the level of interdependence we have, but they're there. And even to the extent of, I had a bowl of cereal this morning. I certainly did not milk the cow or grow the wheat or, you know what I'm saying? Like everything, we are an interconnected system and we have to rely on each other. But this perspective of liberalism that came out of John Locke and other philosophers of you can make your own destiny and you can, it totally ignores all the support and that those men had, who probably also themselves didn't realize it because it's just fish and water, right? So I think if we think about that, then we can say, okay, these systems were designed by a particular kind of person. And what kind of person was that? And what was maybe missing? And how can we modify to be more inclusive of what's missing? Even going back to the Americans with Disabilities Act was signed into law in the 90s. Before that, there was no requirement for ramps or other accessibility features that we just see as natural now because architects primarily were people who walk to get around and don't wheel to get around. So one of the things I say a lot is if we lived in a world without stairs, with just ramps, then people who use wheelchairs would be less disabled than they are now. And again, Hill created the system, didn't even consider creating a ramped society because that wasn't what they needed.
Yeah, I get that what happened in 1776 on till whenever we had constitutional provisions for things, right? Like now, when we think about the ideas of social determinants, there are more white people on public assistance than there are non-white people. I use so-called because those that know me, I'm somewhat of a race abolitionist.
Yeah.
So now it occurs to me that social determinants, not how we're racialized, not how we're genderized or sexualized, but how we engage with the world and what resources are available to us. So I'm not going to have the same experience as somebody living in Appalachia that's been 3 generations in coal mines, living somewhat impoverished. That's reality. 1, I live in Switzerland. 2, I'm pretty highly educated. And 3, I know things that people there don't know, and I've had access from generations of family members that give me that privilege.
Sure.
How can we shift that conversation if we talk about social determinants rather than about the things that most DEI people talk about, visible differences? What's possible in your eyes?
I think about redesigning integrated systems that celebrate interdependence rather than punish it. There's this really wonderful legal scholar named Martha Feynman, who is also an Amri professor. I'm not sure if she's retired, but her legacy is an effort to overcome this liberalism construction of society that I talked about earlier to replace it with what she calls vulnerability. And what that means is not necessarily vulnerable by how it's typically thought of. She sees it in
emotional vulnerability.
Right. Yes. So she says there are 2 different ways that that we as humans are vulnerable. One is because our bodies are vulnerable and that they break. And that's not necessarily what she's intended to. The other thing is that we develop systems that are there that can either increase or decrease our resilience to vulnerability. If we create systems that are more supportive, then vulnerability reduces and access to, if we think about health, increases. And what she says, and one of the reactions from mainly more conservative people is that kind of lends itself to more government intervention. And her response is that government can develop systems that aren't authoritative, but are supportive and recognize people's interdependence. It also leaves room for freedom and opportunity.
Yeah.
And I wrote a theoretical paper about universal design and vulnerability theory in the context of criminal justice involvement. And it really helped me see the alignment between those two perspectives.
Yeah. It occurs to me, like, I'm not familiar with that work. You have to send me your paper or some of her work. I'm familiar with her name, obviously, she was around Amri for a long time. What occurs to me, because the notion of anthropology is a big thing for me. And so it's the capability of going beyond resilience. So when you're resilient, you can have an incident or a setback or a stressor, and you can bounce back to the baseline, back to what was your status quo, but the anti-fragile actually bounce higher. My niece, when she lost her leg some years ago with a car crash, and our theme was bounce higher, because we don't want you to just get back to where you were. We want you to get better, right? And the way you talk about that is, to me, it resonates with going beyond resilience, because you can only go beyond resilience when, once you get there, you keep getting better, you keep growing, you keep helping one another, you keep creating the conditions for each other to matter, so you're adding value and people perceive you're adding value. Those things, that really resonates with me. I'm looking forward to reading. Jen, I think we've answered some of it, but I want to go into what's going on now. You and I have had lots of conversations about this. You've listened to me being me and saying a lot of stuff and probably pissing some people off and alienating folks without intention, with all love. But given what we're experiencing now around inclusion and diversity, knew what you knew now, what would you have done differently over the past 5 years?
I would have started questioning the field and its approaches earlier. Because like I said, when I came into it and I saw how universal design wasn't something that the field of DEI knew about and how useful I thought it could be, it also helped me recognize areas that the field was failing. We know that DEI efforts have actually low success rates, depending on, how they're done. Yeah. And I think that the reasons for that is that, like I said earlier, it's reactive, that the efforts often aren't embedded. So they're training programs, one-off things that aren't really tracked internally or actually turned into action. They are not, the field of DEI isn't very good at explaining to those in power how it works for them as well. So not just leadership, but in particular, thinking about the alienation DEI created in white men, who are the people in our community who have a lot of power, and created a sense of victim blaming. Now, like I said, I got it here. I'm sorry, not victim blaming, but creating a sense of punishment and blame for those in power.
Yeah, I actually liked it. I don't know if you just created that victim splaining. Maybe it's not victim splaining, but it's like this space where you had to be the interpreters of the victim, make people that didn't get it, because that was a big thing. They don't get it. I remember one practitioner, well known in the field, wrote a book called CEOs That Get It. And so that to me indicated that there were CEOs who didn't. And it was like a slight blame placing. You got to be like these CEOs or you're not getting it, right? Anyway, but go ahead. I got a little off track with.
Oh, that's actually, and it's not what the term that I said, but I do love it. And I'm going to continue to think about how to better define it. Jennifer Brown, she always says that everybody has a diversity story. And I think that message is not as prevalent or as prominent in DEI spaces. So no matter who you are, you have something in your world that you need accommodations. Again, we're interdependent beings.
Right.
And so taking the approach of you're going to be helped by these efforts in these ways is really, it is a message that needs to be, I think, better formed in the space. So I think that those are the things that I would question more as I was starting my career as a consultant in DEI. And now I think I said I call my approach organizational culture design because I really do see it as next gen DEI, because I'm trying to address the issues that I identified or that I became aware of earlier.
Yeah, that's great. And we need more of that. And I personally, I think we are in a little bit of a reset. It's tough. It's tough when you're going through a reset like this. But I think when it shakes out, we're going to be onto something that actually has the kind of things built into it that people can put into action every day that help culture, help performance, help people get what they need to do their best work. That's where I think the field probably, for me, it's perpetually been there in the way I practice, but it hasn't been what has been communicated. So the narrative is the narrative of the anti-DEI crowd, which you and I have talked about. Ironically, they don't want DEI to go away. They just want it to be framed like it's a caricature. They want it to be this caricature that they can continue to make money of. But what you're saying is, let's design it so it creates what we know needs to be created, given the fact that we're all part of interdependent systems.
Yeah. Because the goals and aims of the field of DEI are still important. We still need to have organizational systems that create high engagement, low turnover, more retention, more values alignment, more innovation and collaboration. All of those things are the business case for DEI. And those are still very real and very costly when they're not addressed.
Absolutely.
And so how can we be proactive about it so that we do create cultures where people want to stay and contribute and feel valued, and to where we can have out of the box thinking that comes from multiple perspectives.
We have all these tools now. You can call them AI or you can call them LLMs, whatever, but we have unbelievable tools, but the tools don't make sense in human worlds. We use them collectively and together and in a way that makes sense and makes the case for using them and adopting them, not just thinking we're going to get replaced, but people knowing that they're there to raise value rather than companies cutting their cost to profitability versus elevating their innovation to such, because they have this ability to really be not just more productive or more efficient, but actually more of something that they've always said that they wanted more of, if we use the tools way that we can and that they are evolving for us to do.
And you're right, it's a tool because LLMs are comprised of our existing knowledge and approaches.
Exactly.
And so it's really going to lead to innovation.
Exactly. It's the past. The past just recreates the past. Right?
Exactly.
Great. So Jen, is there anything that I should have asked you today that I did not?
I think the role of research in what I do now, because I'm trained as a social scientist. I have training in bioethics and medical anthropology and public health and all these social science fields. And I love doing research. And so when I engage with a client, I always propose and heavily advocate for research time. So that's like document reviews, but I love doing surveys and then interviews and focus groups, because otherwise I don't know what's happening because I'm not there on the ground. So I have a recent client where the two most prominent themes that came out of the research was they have no knowledge creation system or documentation system. And so they're spending all of this time trying to figure out how to answer questions and nowhere were liable to go. And then they had high turnover and all these people with institutional knowledge would leave. And then the other one was role clarity. Like their clients don't really know what they did. The other team members didn't know what they did. And so we had to figure out how to better communicate that. And so to do that, I worked with the team members, not the leadership, to come up with solutions because they're the ones obviously on the ground day to day. But without that, I would have done like some random team building.
Yeah, at some point, as a person who's based and does their work based on evidence, you can't skip that part.
No.
Because it also tells you what you're trying to move toward. A lot of people just go and start trying to figure out what they move towards, but people will tell you what they want to move toward. And once they do, and you get them involved in actually designing what it looks like, another universal design principle, they will usually take it on and own it. And so that whole conversation that we were having earlier comes to the fore. And I love that you keep doing that consistently because to me, it's the only way. I've never done it any other way. I don't know how. I've had situations where I've been dropped in or parachuted in and I got paid, but when I look back, I'm like, I could never get a case study from them because it was, I spent 3 months and then I never really had any interaction other than such follow-ups with the leadership. That's spot on. And I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Jen, delightful as ever. Where do we find you in the world if we want to learn more about Dr. Jen's work, what you're trying to create, any of your writing or work? Where can we find you?
Yeah, my company is Disruptive Inclusion, and you can find that at just disruptiveinclusion.com. I also have a personal website, which is jennifersarrett.com, where some of my thought leadership is posted. I've got op-eds and academic articles there. And then on LinkedIn, you can find me, just my name, Jennifer Sarrett. And there I have a newsletter I call Science of High Performance that I publish weekly about why this kind of approach to culture design is important in all industries, but specifically in health and science. So those are the fields that I specialize in because of my background and I love it. Yeah. And if you're in Atlanta, drop me a note.
Dr. Jennifer Sarrett, Dr. Jen, thank you for being a part of the Reconstructing Inclusion podcast. Thank you for all that are listening. We hope it was helpful. Make it a great day. Peace. If you are committed or simply a little bit curious about how to make DEI accessible to everyone, actionable, that is, unambiguously prioritized and sustainable, aligned with personal and organizational purpose, hit the subscribe button. Make it a great day. Peace.